I still remember the day I first saw the Wakefield mansion. It loomed in the distance like a beautiful prison, all gleaming windows and manicured gardens, yet somehow hollow. The weight of my grief pressed down on my shoulders as I drove up the winding driveway, clutching the newspaper with the job listing circled in red ink. It had been only 6 weeks since I lost my baby daughter. The doctors couldn't explain what went wrong. One day she was breathing, tiny and perfect in my arms, and the next, she wasn't. At 27, I found myself alone with nothing but a small apartment filled with unused baby items and a heart shattered beyond recognition. I didn't apply for the housekeeping job at the Wakefield mansion because I needed money, though I certainly did. I applied because I needed to escape the suffocating silence of my empty apartment. I needed to be somewhere, anywhere, that didn't remind me of what I had lost. When Richard Wakefield opened the door himself, I was caught off guard. I had expected a butler or house manager, not the billionaire himself. He stood tall yet somehow diminished, his beard prematurely graying, eyes tired and distant. There was something in his posture that I recognized immediately: grief. "Julia Bennett," he asked, his voice formal but not unkind. "Yes, sir. I'm here about the housekeeping position." He nodded and invited me inside. The interior of the mansion was exactly as I'd imagined: luxurious, immaculate, and strangely lifeless. Like a museum after hours. He led me to a sitting room with leather chairs that probably cost more than my car. "Your resume says you've done housekeeping before," he said, scanning my application. "Yes, through college and after. I'm thorough and I work quietly." He looked up at that last part, studying my face. "Quietly is good. This household values peace." I nodded, not offering more words than necessary. Something told me this man had heard enough empty platitudes to last a lifetime. "May I ask why you're seeking employment now?" he asked. I could have made up something pleasant, but instead, I heard myself say, "I recently lost my daughter. She was only 3 weeks old." The words hung in the air between us. "I need to be somewhere new." His expression changed then, a flash of recognition, of shared understanding. He didn't offer condolences, and for that, I was grateful. "I have a daughter," he said after a moment. "Luna. She's 5. She was born blind." I nodded again, unsure what to say. "She requires a certain environment. Calm. Predictable. The house must remain as it is." "I understand, Mr. Wakefield." "Richard," he corrected, then seemed surprised at himself for doing so. "You'll start tomorrow if that works for you. Martha will show you around." And that was it. No further questions about my qualifications or experience. Something in my quiet grief had spoken to him, and it was enough. The next day, Martha, the senior housekeeper, gave me a tour of the enormous house. "Mr. Wakefield lost his wife just days after Luna was born," she whispered. "Helicopter crash. He hasn't been the same since. And with Luna's condition." She trailed off, leading me through corridor after corridor of barely used rooms. I learned the cleaning schedule, where supplies were kept, which areas to avoid when Luna was resting. It all seemed straightforward enough. But nothing prepared me for my first encounter with Luna herself. I was taking my lunch break in the kitchen when I saw her. A small figure sitting by the large bay window in the adjacent room, so still she could have been part of the furniture. Her dark hair was neatly brushed, falling over her shoulders, and she clutched a worn teddy bear to her chest. But what struck me most were her eyes, large, beautiful, and completely unfocused. They stared into the distance, never settling on anything. I sat quietly, watching her from across the room. She never moved, never spoke. Occasionally, her head would tilt slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. There was an aura of profound loneliness around her that made my chest ache. Over the next few days, I observed the household's rhythm. Richard spent hours in his office, but emerged regularly to sit with Luna. He would read to her or simply watch her from across the room, his face a mask of helplessness and devotion. The other staff kept their distance, moving around Luna like she was made of glass. They spoke about her in hushed tones, sharing observations about little habits, how she hummed at night or reached for the same toy each evening. One afternoon, while dusting the shelves near where Luna sat, I accidentally dropped my cloth. The soft sound made her flinch ever so slightly. I apologized quietly, not expecting a response. but her head turned, just a fraction, in my direction. It was barely noticeable, but in that moment, something stirred within me, a flicker of curiosity that would soon grow into something much more powerful. There was something about this silent child that called to me, something I couldn't yet name but couldn't ignore either. Please make sure to subscribe to this channel. As I finished my first week at the mansion, I found myself lingering in rooms where Luna was present. Not speaking, not interfering, just being there. And sometimes, when I was folding linens or organizing drawers, I'd notice her head turn slightly toward the sound of my movements. I didn't know it then, but those tiny responses were the first threads of a connection that would change both our lives forever. In that cold, quiet mansion, surrounded by wealth that couldn't heal its inhabitants, I had found an unexpected purpose. By my second week at the Wakefield mansion, I had settled into a routine. Each morning, I arrived early, moving through the silent corridors like a ghost. I cleaned methodically room by room, pausing only when I encountered Luna or her father. Luna fascinated me. Unlike other children her age who bubbled with energy and questions, she existed in a world of her own. She spent most days sitting in the same spots, by the window in the living room, on the floor of her bedroom, or occasionally in the hallway near the kitchen. Always with that same teddy bear clutched to her chest. One day, while organizing linens in the hallway, I heard a soft sound. A quiet humming, almost like a whisper. I paused, listening. It was Luna, sitting on the floor not far from her bedroom door, making a tuneless melody. I continued folding, pretending not to notice, but my attention was fixed on her. After a few minutes, the humming stopped. Then, to my surprise, she began crawling toward me, her small hands feeling along the floor and wall for guidance. I set down the sheet I was folding and watched as she approached. When she was about a foot away, I gently extended my hand, not saying a word. Luna's movements stopped. Her hand hovered in the air, uncertain. Then, carefully, she reached out and her fingers brushed against mine. That moment of contact, though brief, felt significant. Her touch was tentative but deliberate. She wasn't just reaching randomly, she had known I was there. After a moment, she pulled back and returned to her sitting position, clutching her teddy bear once more. From then on, I made sure to work near Luna whenever possible. Not disturbing her, just being present. I noticed that she began to position herself in places where I would be cleaning or organizing. Sometimes in the hallway when I was dusting, or near the kitchen when I was folding napkins. Richard noticed too. One evening, as I was preparing to leave, he approached me in the hallway. "Luna seems different when you're around," he said cautiously. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." "She moves more. She sits in different places." He hesitated. "She hasn't done that in a long time." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "I try not to disturb her." "No, it's good," he said quickly. I wonder why." I thought for a moment before answering. "She reminds me of someone," I admitted. "But I'm not trying to replace anyone. I just want to help." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. There was no warmth in his expression, but perhaps a hint of trust beginning to form. That night, I lay awake in my small room at the back of the mansion, thinking about Luna. There was something about her that didn't quite fit with what I'd been told. The way she responded to sounds was too precise for someone who had allegedly never experienced any other sensory input. The way her head would turn when I entered a room, or how she would tilt her face when sunshine filled the room. The next morning, I was dusting Luna's room while she sat in her usual corner. As I reached behind a wooden chest to clean, I heard a sound that froze me in place, a whisper. I turned slowly to look at Luna. Her lips were moving, forming words I couldn't quite catch as she hugged her teddy bear. I leaned closer, careful not to startle her. Her voice was barely audible, but it was definitely there. She wasn't just making sounds, she was speaking to her bear in fragmented sentences. This wasn't the behavior of a child completely disconnected from the world. I sat down in a nearby chair and simply watched. As Luna continued whispering, I noticed something else. Her head moved slightly in response to every sound in the room. When the curtains rustled with the breeze, when the air conditioning hummed to life, when a door closed somewhere down the hall, each time, her head would turn with remarkable precision toward the source. My heart began to race. These weren't random movements. They were reactions, accurate, consistent reactions to her environment. Could a child who had never seen anything still map a room so precisely with just her hearing? I decided to test my theory. I stood up and walked across the room, stepping as lightly as possible. Luna's head turned, following my movement perfectly. I picked up a small toy and set it down on a table. Again, her head shifted toward the sound. Then I tried something different. I took out my phone to check the time and accidentally activated the flashlight. The beam swept across the room, briefly passing over Luna's face. And that's when I saw it. Her eyelids flickered. Almost imperceptibly, but they definitely moved in response to the light. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned the flashlight off, waited a moment, then deliberately turned it on again, waving the beam slowly in front of her face. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes moved slightly, as if trying to track the light. I sat down, my heart pounding in my chest. This didn't make sense. Luna was supposed to be completely blind from birth. That's what everyone believed, the doctors, Richard, the entire staff. Yet here she was, responding to light. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, running through possibilities in my mind. Maybe it was just a reflex. Maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see. But deep down, I knew what I had witnessed was real. The next morning, I tried another experiment. While Luna sat near the window, I slowly pushed it open wider, letting in more sunlight and a gentle breeze. She turned her face toward the window immediately. Not because of the sound or the feeling of air, the movement was too direct, too purposeful. She was responding to the light. With each passing day, my suspicions grew stronger. I began keeping a journal of Luna's reactions, documenting every instance where she seemed to respond to visual stimuli. Small moments, a turn of the head when shadows moved across the floor, a slight flinch when I waved my hand near her face, the way she seemed to orient herself toward the brightest part of a room. None of these reactions were dramatic enough to draw attention from someone who wasn't looking for them. But I was looking now, and I couldn't unsee the pattern forming before my eyes. Something wasn't right about Luna's diagnosis, and I was becoming increasingly determined to find out what it was. I knew I needed more concrete evidence before saying anything to Richard. Luna's reactions to light were subtle, easy to dismiss as coincidence if you weren't paying close attention. And accusing a billionaire of misunderstanding his daughter's condition wasn't something to do lightly. One afternoon, while tidying the bathroom cabinets, I noticed a wooden box tucked behind some towels. Curious, I pulled it out. Inside were several small bottles of eye drops, their labels partially worn away. Each was dated, going back several years. The doctor's name, Dr. Atticus Morrow, was printed on each label, though the purpose of the medication wasn't clearly stated. I examined one bottle closely. The solution didn't look like ordinary eye drops for dryness or allergies. When no one was around, I quickly searched the medication name on my phone. What I found sent a chill through me. The compound was primarily used to reduce eye pressure, but had been reported to affect pupil response and light sensitivity when used long-term, especially in children. Why would a blind child need medication that affected pupil response? It made no sense unless. I carefully replaced everything and made a mental note of the medication name and dosage. That evening, after finishing my duties, I sat in my room and wrote down everything I had observed about Luna so far, her reactions to sound, to light, to movement. When I looked at it all together, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The next morning, I watched as one of the senior staff members administered Luna's eye drops. The girl didn't resist, she was used to the routine. But I couldn't help wondering if these drops were actually helping her or potentially doing harm. I decided to conduct one final test before taking any action. I waited until Luna was alone in her room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her teddy bear. I knelt beside her and gently pulled a small flashlight from my pocket. "Luna," I said softly, "I'm going to shine a little light. Tell me if you feel anything, okay?" She didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. Slowly, I raised the flashlight and pointed it directly at her eyes, my heart pounding with fear and hope. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, Luna blinked once, then again, faster the second time. I moved closer, keeping the light steady. "Luna, can you feel that?" I whispered. The room was completely silent. Luna tilted her head slightly, her brows furrowing in concentration. Then, in the smallest, most fragile voice, she said something that shook me to my core. "I think I saw a light." "Mommy." I froze, the flashlight nearly slipping from my fingers. It wasn't just the fact that Luna had spoken clearly, or that she'd admitted to seeing something. It was that last word, "Mommy." My eyes filled with tears instantly. All the grief I'd been carrying since losing my baby came rushing back, but now mingled with something new: purpose. Luna had reached out in the only way she knew how, confused perhaps about who I was, but connecting nonetheless. I gently placed my hand on her shoulder. "I'm here," I said, my voice trembling. "You're safe." Luna didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned forward until her head rested against my chest. It was such a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. This wasn't just confirmation of my suspicions, it was the beginning of a bond one hadn't expected to form. I stayed like that for several minutes, holding Luna without saying anything more. I didn't want to overwhelm her or break the fragile connection we'd established. When she finally pulled away, she seemed calmer, though her expression remained distant. "You're very brave," I whispered, and though Luna didn't respond, something in her posture had changed. She seemed more present, more aware than before. That night, I lay awake for hours, trying to process what had happened. Luna had seen light, she'd said so herself, which meant she wasn't completely blind as everyone believed. And those eye drops, could they be affecting her vision somehow? Suppressing it rather than helping? I needed answers, but I also needed to be careful. If I was right, this wasn't just a medical mistake, it was something much worse. Luna had been living in darkness unnecessarily, cut off from a world she might actually be able to see. By morning, I had made my decision. I would continue observing and documenting, gathering as much evidence as possible before approaching Richard. I would be methodical and thorough. Because if I was right, Luna's entire life was about to change, and so was mine. The next day, I continued my work as usual, but my mind was racing with plans and possibilities. Each time I passed Luna's room, each time I saw her sitting quietly with that vacant expression, my determination grew stronger. Luna deserved to see the world, even if just glimpses of it. And I was going to make sure she got that chance, no matter what it took. The next afternoon, I returned to Luna's room with the flashlight. I had been thinking about our previous interaction all day, and I needed to confirm what I'd seen. Luna was sitting on her rug as usual, gently rocking her teddy bear. I knelt beside her and carefully pulled out the flashlight again. But before I could even turn it on, I heard a voice from the doorway. "What are you doing?" I spun around to see Richard standing there, his face flushed with anger and confusion. He stepped into the room quickly, eyes fixed on the flashlight in my hand. "What is that? What are you doing to my daughter?" His voice was sharp with accusation. I stood up, fumbling for words. "Mr. Wakefield, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Why you're experimenting on a blind child." He snatched the flashlight from my hand, his expression a mixture of betrayal and rage. Before I could defend myself, something unprecedented happened. Luna suddenly stood up and actually ran straight toward me. She wrapped her arms around my waist and held on tightly, her small body trembling against mine. Richard froze, completely stunned. In the 5 years of Luna's life, he had never seen her move with such purpose or confidence. "Luna," he said, his voice suddenly uncertain. Luna turned her head slightly in the direction of his voice. Then, in a small, shaking voice, she said, "I saw a light." Richard blinked, confusion replacing anger. "What did you say?" "I saw a light," Luna repeated, still clinging to me. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Richard's mind working, trying to process what he'd just heard. His daughter, believed blind from birth, had just spoken clearly and claimed to have seen something. I stayed quiet, letting the moment speak for itself. After what felt like an eternity, Richard's posture changed. His shoulders slumped, and when he spoke again, his voice was low and controlled. "Stop giving her the eye drops. At least for now." I nodded, relief washing over me. "Yes, sir." The following days were filled with quiet changes. Without the eye drops, Luna began responding to light more frequently, especially to sunlight. When I opened the curtains in the morning, she would turn her head toward the window and keep her face in that direction, as if enjoying the brightness. Richard often stood silently in the doorway, watching these reactions with a mixture of hope and disbelief. I began simple tests with Luna, using flashcards with large black shapes on white backgrounds. The first time I held up a circle and Luna pointed to it, Richard gasped audibly from where he stood observing. "She saw that," he whispered, stepping closer. She actually saw that. Each day brought new progress. Luna began reacting not just to light, but to objects. I would place 3 toys in front of her, a ball, a car, and a duck, then nudge one gently. Luna would smile and point to the one I'd moved. She was seeing movement, distinguishing between objects. One evening, as Luna sat with me by the window, she asked a question that took my breath away. "What color is that?" she said, pointing toward a blanket on the chair. I answered softly, "It's blue, Luna." Her face lit up, and she asked about other things in the room. Richard stood in the doorway, not saying a word, his eyes filled with unshed tears. For a man who had lived with hopelessness for years, this sudden spark of progress was overwhelming. One morning, Luna walked toward the sunlight streaming through the hallway window without stumbling or feeling her way along. She moved with quiet confidence, stretching her hand out toward the light. Richard had been in his office, but came out when he heard her footsteps. He stopped abruptly when he saw Luna standing in the light, one hand on the glass, the other still holding her teddy bear. "She's not afraid anymore," I said gently. Richard sat down heavily on a nearby chair, his face pale. "I don't understand how we missed it all these years," he said quietly. I didn't answer immediately. There was no simple explanation. It could have been a wrong diagnosis, the effects of the medication, or simply that no one had paid close enough attention. "She's not lost anymore," I finally replied. "She's gaining it back, slowly." The atmosphere in the mansion changed completely over the next few days. It felt lighter, more alive. Luna responded to colors, shapes, and simple gestures. She smiled more and even laughed softly when I tickled her or told her silly stories. Richard no longer watched from a distance, but sat with us during these interactions, showing Luna old family photos and asking if she could see anything in them. One afternoon, Luna squinted at a picture of a woman in a red dress and asked, "Who is that lady?" Richard's eyes filled with tears. "That's your mother," he said, his voice breaking. I sat beside them, quietly holding Luna's hand. The journey was far from over, but one thing was certain: Luna was changing. And it had all begun with those simple words. I saw a light. But even as we celebrated these small victories, questions nagged at me. Why had Luna been prescribed those eye drops in the first place? Who was Dr. Morrow, and what had he actually diagnosed? I knew I needed more answers, and I was determined to find them. I decided to take one of the eye drop bottles for testing. The next morning, while Richard was on a business call, I drove to a neighboring city where an old friend from nursing school was completing her residency in ophthalmology. Sophia and I hadn't spoken in years, but when I explained the situation briefly, she agreed to analyze the drops. A few days later, she called me with results that confirmed my worst fears. "These aren't normal eye drops," Sophia explained, her voice tense. "There's a compound called cyclopentolate in extremely high doses. It causes pupil contraction and inhibits light response. In normal doses, it's used for certain eye conditions, but this formula is aggressive. Prolonged use, especially in children, could easily cause temporary vision loss or convince someone they're blind if they had limited vision to begin with." I felt sick to my stomach. "You're saying the drops actually made her blind?" "Yes. And if she was never completely blind to begin with, these drops would have erased what little sight she had. Could this have been a mistake?" I asked desperately. "A mixed-up prescription or something?" Sophia's answer was definitive. "No. This formula was intentional. Someone designed it specifically to restrict vision." When I saw the name on the report, Dr. Atticus Morrow, something cold settled in my chest. This wasn't just medical negligence. This was deliberate harm inflicted on a child. I drove back to the mansion in a daze, the lab report clutched in my hand. The time had come to share everything with Richard. Whatever his reaction might be, Luna deserved the truth, and so did he. That evening, I knocked on Richard's office door, the lab report tucked under my arm. My heart was pounding, but I reminded myself this was about Luna, not me. "Come in," his voice called. I stepped into the dimly lit office. Richard sat behind his massive desk, papers spread before him, though I doubted he'd been focusing on work. Since Luna's breakthrough, he'd been distracted, caught between hope and confusion. "May I speak with you about something important?" I asked. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course." I sat down and placed the lab report on his desk. "I had the eye drops analyzed," I said simply. His expression shifted from surprise to something darker. "You took them without permission?" "Yes," I admitted. "And I'm not sorry I did. Please read the report." Richard stared at me for a long moment before picking up the document. I watched his face as he read, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to something that looked like physical pain. When he saw Dr. Morrow's name printed at the bottom, he stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to me. "This can't be real," he finally said, his voice strained. "Dr. Morrow treated Luna since she was a newborn. He told me she had no retinal response, that her optic nerve was underdeveloped. He convinced me she would never see anything." I explained everything Sophia had told me about the chemical compound, its purpose, and the risks. The evidence was clear. Luna had not been born completely blind, and the drops had made her condition worse. Richard sat back down, visibly shaken. "I trusted him," he murmured. I followed every instruction. I reached across the desk and touched his hand briefly. "You didn't know. But now we do." He nodded slowly. "Then we have to find him. We have to know why he did this." The search for Dr. Atticus Morrow began that night. Richard called old colleagues, medical offices throughout the state, and finally the licensing board. Everyone gave similar answers. Dr. Morrow hadn't practiced medicine in years. His license had been suspended after several lawsuits involving other children. Cases that never made national news but were serious enough to end his career. "I should have questioned him," Richard said one night, his voice hollow. "After Maria died in the crash, I accepted everything he said. I was too broken to think clearly." I continued my own research, finding obscure blog posts and forum discussions from angry parents who'd encountered Morrow. One mentioned him leaving town quietly after settling lawsuits privately. He had vanished. Richard and I sat in the library late into the night, surrounded by printouts and notes. Luna was asleep upstairs, unaware of the storm brewing around her past. "He stole years from her," Richard said quietly, holding a photo of Luna in one hand and the lab report in the other. "Years she could have been seeing, learning, living." "She's not lost anymore," I reminded him. "She's gaining it back every day." He looked at me, the hardness in his face softening. "You saved her." I shook my head. "We still have a long way to go." Richard nodded, determination replacing despair. "We'll keep searching for Morrow, even if it takes months. Luna deserves to know the truth." Over the following weeks, we compiled evidence, medical records, test results, prescription histories. Richard contacted a journalist he trusted, someone known for careful reporting. We wanted the truth exposed so no other child would suffer the same fate. But soon after sharing our findings with the journalist, strange things began happening. A new article appeared online, not about Morrow, but about Richard, suggesting he had ignored professional advice regarding Luna's treatment for years. It painted him as a careless father. Richard was stunned. "None of this is true," he said, showing me the article on his tablet. I tried contacting the journalist, but they insisted the piece hadn't come from them. Someone had leaked false information to discredit Richard before the real story emerged. Then I began receiving messages on my phone from an unknown number. At first, they were vague. "You should stop, and it's not your business." Later, they became more direct. "Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." I showed Richard immediately. He wanted to call the police, but we had no real evidence of who was behind the threats. All we knew was that someone didn't want the truth about Dr. Morrow going public. Richard's legal team began investigating the source of the false articles, tracing IP addresses and contacting web hosts, but everything led to private servers or untraceable sources. The situation was becoming increasingly stressful, but it also confirmed one thing: someone was scared of what we were about to reveal. Despite the chaos unfolding around us, something beautiful was happening with Luna. We'd taken her to a specialist for a full vision assessment, and the results were promising. She had partial functional vision. It wasn't perfect and might never be completely normal, but she could detect light, identify shapes, and react to movement. The specialist explained that with regular visual stimulation, Luna could improve her processing abilities. We set up daily activities, colorful toys, movement-based games, time in sunlit rooms. Luna responded beautifully, pointing to colors when asked, following moving objects with her eyes, even starting to recognize the difference between day and night. These changes brought new energy to the house. The staff, once solemn and reserved, began smiling more often. There was hope again, and Luna was at the center of it all, defying expectations every day. One afternoon, I placed crayons and paper in front of her. "These are colors," I explained simply. "You can do anything you want with them." Luna touched each crayon, feeling their shape. Then she picked up the yellow one and pressed it to the paper. The line she drew was shaky and uneven, but it was hers. She continued drawing scattered lines across the page, and when she finished, she held up the paper with a smile. "Is it good?" she asked. I hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by emotion. This wasn't just a drawing, it was evidence of how far she'd come. Richard walked in at that moment and saw the drawing in Luna's hand. "It's beautiful," he said, kneeling beside her. Drawing became part of our daily routine. Luna explored colors and shapes with growing confidence, and the mansion began to feel less like a mausoleum and more like a home. Laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for years. But outside our walls, the pressure continued. More articles appeared accusing Richard of past business negligence. One even claimed I had fabricated Luna's progress for attention. We knew none of it was true, but the smear campaign was clearly organized and persistent. Still, we refused to back down. We continued gathering evidence, sharing verified documents with legal teams and medical boards. I also connected with 2 other families who suspected their children had been mistreated by Morrow. Their stories matched Luna's: unexplained vision problems, questionable prescriptions, limited improvement until medication was discontinued. This wasn't just about Luna anymore. It was a pattern, and it had to be stopped. But Luna's well-being remained our priority. We would protect her no matter what. Despite everything trying to silence us, Luna's world was expanding. She began naming colors independently: red, blue, green, with yellow being her favorite. "It makes me feel happy," she explained one day, holding a yellow crayon to her cheek. Richard and I formed a quiet routine with Luna, reading stories, practicing visual exercises, creating art together. The mansion that once felt cold and empty was now filled with purpose and warmth. The threats would continue, but we were no longer afraid. The truth we had uncovered couldn't be erased, and Luna, once thought to be lost in darkness, was finally seeing her future. After weeks of collecting evidence, Richard and I decided it was time for formal action. We scheduled a meeting with the district attorney's office, bringing our complete file, lab reports, prescription records, testimonies from other families, and detailed documentation of Luna's progress since stopping the medication. Richard didn't rely on his connections or bring his high-powered attorneys. He walked in like any other concerned citizen, with me at his side carrying our evidence folder. The prosecutor who received us was young but serious, listening attentively as we explained Luna's situation. When we mentioned Dr. Atticus Morrow, he raised an eyebrow. "You're not the first to bring him up," he said, and that single sentence gave us hope. Over the following weeks, the district attorney's office launched an investigation. Phone calls were made, records subpoenaed, and former patients contacted. Then something shocking emerged. Dr. Morrow had signed private contracts with pharmaceutical companies, giving him access to experimental compounds that had never passed proper clinical trials. The files revealed that he had used his position as a pediatric specialist to conduct unofficial trials on children, prescribing treatments that weren't approved. In exchange, he received financial bonuses, travel perks, and under-the-table compensation. Investigators matched product codes from the pharmaceutical companies to ingredients in Luna's eye drops. The evidence was damning: dates, names, transactions, signatures. Richard was furious. I was sickened. We had suspected something terrible, but this level of calculated harm was beyond what we'd imagined. With this evidence, the district attorney approved a formal criminal case. Soon after, the media caught wind of the story. Local news ran the first pieces: child's vision blocked by illegal drug trials. Then national outlets followed. Interview requests flooded in, and headlines spread across the country. As the story gained attention, more families came forward. Parents who had seen unexplained changes in their children's vision began asking questions, connecting dots they hadn't seen before. The truth was finally emerging. The public reaction was intense. Forums filled with similar stories, parents describing how their children had been prescribed the same drops by Morrow with no improvement or worsening symptoms. Some had tried reporting him in the past, but were ignored or pressured into silence. Now, with national attention, silence was no longer an option. Unexpectedly, I became something of a spokesperson. Reporters asked for interviews, and though nervous at first, I agreed to speak. I didn't want fame. I just wanted to tell the truth. I explained how I'd met Luna, what I'd observed, and how small details had led me to question everything. My face appeared on screens across the country with headlines like "Nanny Who Uncovered the Truth" and "Julia Bennett, a voice for the voiceless." My life had transformed completely. Richard received attention too, but avoided the spotlight whenever possible. He attended court hearings and provided statements to investigators, but refused to become the center of the story. For him, this was about Luna and all the children who had been harmed. His guilt ran deep. For years, he had trusted Morrow without question, believed his daughter's blindness was unchangeable. Now, each day with Luna reminded him how much had been stolen from her. Yet something had changed in him too. He wasn't just a grieving father anymore, he was active, alert, involved. He made sure Luna received the best visual therapy available, followed every update in the case, and in quiet moments, spoke to me not as an employee, but as someone he respected deeply. Slowly, without either of us planning it, a bond grew between us. It wasn't romantic at first, just built on mutual respect and shared purpose. At home, Luna continued making progress. Her vision wasn't perfect, but she learned quickly. She could recognize simple objects, match colors, and follow movements in bright rooms. She became more talkative, asking questions about everything she hadn't been able to experience before. "Is that blue?" she'd ask, pointing at the sky. Or, "What's that shape?" while touching the edge of a book. We answered every question patiently, creating a structured routine of games, drawing, visual exercises, and reading time. The mansion's atmosphere transformed completely. There was laughter, movement, purpose. Staff members relaxed, and the house felt like a home. Sometimes I would catch Richard smiling at me during dinner, and I'd smile back, a silent acknowledgement of everything we'd been through together. It wasn't just about Luna anymore. Our shared fight had created something deeper between us that didn't need words yet. By the time the case officially went to trial, public support was overwhelming. Dozens of families testified. The pharmaceutical companies denied involvement initially, but the evidence made denial impossible. Dr. Morrow, finally located in another state living under a false identity, was arrested and brought to court. His trial became symbolic of the importance of medical ethics and child protection. I testified calmly, explaining my discoveries and actions. Richard also testified, admitting his blind trust and failure to question Morrow sooner. The court respected our honesty. Luna didn't appear in court, but her drawings were submitted as evidence of her progress. When the guilty verdict was announced, it felt like justice had finally arrived. The crowd outside the courthouse erupted in applause. Richard and I didn't celebrate publicly. We drove home in silence, but with a sense of peace between us. That night, Luna showed me a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. "It's us," she said simply. I smiled, my heart full. The road had been difficult, but we had walked it together, and we were just beginning. The official conviction of Dr. Atticus Morrow made national headlines. The court found him guilty of illegal medical practices, including using unapproved medications on children without proper consent. He received a prison sentence, while the pharmaceutical companies faced heavy fines and restrictions on future research protocols. The case brought awareness to thousands of families and prompted changes in how medical trials were approved and monitored. But for Richard, Luna, and me, the most important thing was that it was over. The chapter of fear and secrets had ended. We could focus entirely on healing. Richard stepped back from his business responsibilities to spend more time at home. I remained fully present, continuing to guide Luna with patience and love. And Luna, who once sat in silence holding her teddy bear, was moving forward rapidly. With help from a child development specialist, she was enrolled in a regular elementary school with a customized learning plan. It was the beginning of a new life, one filled with movement, people, and bright colors. The first days of school were challenging. Luna had never been in a classroom before, surrounded by so many other children. I accompanied her to meet the teacher, who had read Luna's file and understood her unique situation. We introduced Luna to the class gradually, giving her time to adjust. Initially, she stayed quiet and close to me, overwhelmed by the noise and constant motion. But within days, things began to change. She started answering questions, raising her hand, joining group activities. She was fascinated by things other children took for granted: colors on the board, pictures in books, even the way chalk left marks on the blackboard. I would pick her up each afternoon, and Luna would talk nonstop on the way home. "Did you know blue and yellow make green?" she asked one day, her words tumbling out excitedly. "And Miss Carter says I draw better than anyone in class." Richard listened with pride each evening. The little girl he once feared would never engage with the world was now fully immersed in it. Months passed quickly. Luna made friends and improved in every subject, especially art. Her teachers said she had a unique way of understanding shapes and colors, perhaps because she developed other senses so strongly before regaining her vision. Richard converted one of the unused rooms into a mini art studio just for her, with shelves full of paints, pencils, and paper. Luna spent hours there after school, often working with soft music playing in the background. I would sit nearby sometimes, watching her create, amazed at how confidently her hands moved across the page now. One day, an official letter arrived. Luna had been selected to receive a special medal from a National Children's Foundation, an honor given to children who had shown exceptional strength in difficult circumstances. Along with the medal, she would be named an ambassador for resilient childhood, encouraging other kids facing challenges. The day of the ceremony arrived. I helped Luna into a soft yellow dress, her favorite color. Richard wore a dark suit with a yellow flower pin that matched Luna's dress. We arrived early and were guided backstage. Other children were also receiving honors, but Luna's name was last on the list. The host gave a moving speech about children overcoming difficult beginnings. When Luna's name was called, she walked confidently across the stage, holding my hand. The applause was thunderous. A volunteer placed the medal gently around her neck. Then something unexpected happened. The host turned to the audience and announced they had one more recognition to give, to the woman who stood by her when no one else did, who believed in light when everything seemed dark. Today, we recognize Julia Bennett as Luna's adoptive mother and lifelong guardian. I froze, completely surprised. Then I stepped forward, tears streaming down my face. Luna hugged me tightly, and the crowd stood in applause. It was a moment I would never forget, the moment I officially became Luna's mother. Later that evening, back at the mansion, Richard opened a bottle of champagne. We sat in the living room, Luna already asleep upstairs, her medal placed proudly on her nightstand. "Did you know about this?" I asked Richard, still stunned by the announcement. He smiled. "I may have helped with the paperwork. If you want it, that is." "If I want it?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "Richard, from the moment I found Luna, from the first time she called me Mommy, I've loved her as my own." He reached across the sofa and took my hand. "You gave her life, Julia. You gave us both life." Something shifted between us that night. The shared purpose that had brought us together had blossomed into something deeper. As we sat talking into the early hours, making plans for Luna's future, I realized that not only had I found a daughter, I had found a family. In the months that followed, our relationship evolved naturally. Richard and I moved from colleagues to co-parents to something more intimate. Our first kiss happened in Luna's art studio, surrounded by her colorful paintings, a spontaneous moment of connection that felt inevitable. Luna noticed the change immediately. "Are you and Daddy in love?" she asked one morning at breakfast, her eyes bright with hope. I looked at Richard, who smiled back at me. "Yes," I answered simply. "I think we are." Luna clapped her hands excitedly. I knew it. I drew a picture of us as a family weeks ago. We laughed, and Richard pulled me close, kissing the top of my head. It wasn't the conventional way to build a family. We had started with crisis, moved through challenge, and arrived at love. But it felt right, as if this was always how it was meant to be. Luna continued to thrive at school. Her art teacher suggested special weekend classes at the local community center, where she could develop her talents further. Her social circle expanded, and the quiet, isolated child I'd first met was now vibrant and engaged. Richard's business associates noticed the change in him too. The stern, distant man had been replaced by someone more present, more balanced. He began bringing Luna to the office occasionally, proudly introducing her to everyone. This is my daughter, he would say. And this is Julia, the woman who saved us both. Life wasn't perfect. Luna still had moments of frustration when her vision couldn't keep up with her imagination. She sometimes struggled with depth perception or got headaches from visual overload. But these challenges were nothing compared to what she had overcome. One evening, as I tucked Luna into bed, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. Was I always going to be your daughter? She whispered, clutching her teddy bear, the same one she'd had when I first arrived. I sat on the edge of her bed, considering how to answer. I don't think anyone knows exactly how families are meant to find each other, I said carefully. But I believe some people are meant to be together, even if they have to take unusual paths to find one another. She nodded thoughtfully. Like you had a baby who couldn't stay, and I had a mommy who had to go away, and somehow we found each other instead? My breath caught. I had never spoken directly to Luna about the baby I'd lost, though she knew I had experienced a loss before coming to the mansion. Yes, I managed to say through sudden tears. Something like that. Luna reached up and wiped a tear from my cheek. Don't be sad. We're together now. That's what matters. In that moment, I realized that Luna had healed me as much as I had helped her. We had saved each other in ways neither of us could have imagined. Years passed, and Luna grew into a confident teenager with a clear sense of purpose. She continued developing her artistic talents, with teachers describing her as focused, kind, and exceptionally gifted. Her unique perspective, having experienced the world first through darkness and then through gradually improving sight, gave her art a distinctive quality that people responded to immediately. By the time she turned 16, Luna had won several youth art competitions and had her work displayed in local galleries. She used her platform to speak about her experience, becoming an advocate for children with vision impairments and those affected by medical malpractice. Richard and I married when Luna was 12, in a small ceremony in the garden. Luna served as my maid of honor, proudly walking down the aisle before me, scattering yellow rose petals. The mansion that had once felt like a prison to Richard had transformed into a true home, filled with light and laughter. We established a foundation in Luna's name, dedicated to supporting children affected by medical negligence and providing resources for families navigating complex diagnoses. The Wakefield Center for Child Advocacy became nationally recognized, with Luna herself sometimes speaking at events despite her young age. Dr. Morrow remained in prison, his case becoming a landmark in medical ethics education. The pharmaceutical companies involved were restructured under court supervision, with new protocols established to prevent similar abuses. Our story had created lasting change, rippling out beyond our family to protect countless other children. Luna's high school years were filled with normal teenage experiences, friends, school dances, driver's education, though her vision required some accommodations and college applications. Her bedroom walls, once bare, were covered with photographs, art prints, and her own creations. The teddy bear she'd clutched during her silent years still sat on her bed, a reminder of how far she'd come. When college acceptance letters began arriving, Luna surprised us by choosing an art academy in New York, far from our home, but perfect for her ambitions. Though I worried about her being so far away, I knew she was ready. Her independence was something to celebrate, not fear. Are you sure you'll be okay in the city? I asked as we helped her pack. Luna laughed, her eyes, now bright and focused behind stylish glasses, crinkling at the corners. Mom, I navigated darkness for 5 years. I think I can handle Manhattan. The day we moved her into her dormitory, I found myself fighting tears. Richard squeezed my hand as we watched Luna arrange her art supplies on her new desk, chatting excitedly with her roommate. "She'll be fine," he whispered. "You gave her everything she needs." "We did," I corrected him. "We did this together." Luna flourished at art school, developing a distinctive style that combined bold colors with subtle textures that could be appreciated both visually and tactily. Her first-year portfolio earned her a prestigious summer internship at a gallery known for discovering emerging talents. During her sophomore year, Luna called us with exciting news. She had been invited to hold her first solo exhibition at a small, but respected gallery in Chelsea. "They want me to create a series focused on my journey," she explained over video chat, her face flushed with excitement. "From darkness to light. They think my story will resonate with people." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, feeling a surge of pride. "We'll be there for the opening, of course." Luna worked tirelessly on her exhibition, creating 15 large canvases, each representing a significant moment in her life. She titled the series Emergent Light and insisted on keeping most of the pieces secret until opening night. When that evening finally arrived, Richard, myself, and dozens of Luna's supporters gathered at the gallery. Former teachers, friends, even the journalist who had first broken the story about Dr. Morrow, all came to celebrate Luna's achievement. The paintings were breathtaking, vibrant explosions of color contrasted with subtle shadows, creating a visual journey that told her story without words. Each canvas had a simple title: Silence, First Sound, Whisper, Flashlight, Yellow, Classroom, Friends. The final piece, titled Family, showed 3 figures surrounded by golden light. Luna stood before the gathered crowd to give a short speech. At 18, she had grown into a poised young woman with an artist's observant eyes and a quiet confidence that commanded attention. "People often ask me when I first saw light," she began, her voice clear and steady. "They expect me to talk about flashlights or sunlight or my first drawing. But the truth is, the first light I ever saw didn't come from my eyes. It came from her heart." She pointed to me, and I covered my mouth, overwhelmed with emotion. "My mother, Julia, wasn't looking for anything when she came to our house. She was just trying to escape her own darkness. But she noticed what no one else had: the small signs that I wasn't completely blind. She fought for me when it wasn't her responsibility. She gave me color when my world was gray." Luna paused, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And my father, who had lost so much already, found the courage to accept truth when it would have been easier to deny it. Together, they taught me that seeing isn't just about eyes, it's about truly paying attention to what matters." The gallery erupted in applause. Richard put his arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into him, overcome with pride and love for the incredible young woman our daughter had become. That night, as guests moved through the exhibition, I stood before the painting titled Flashlight, a striking canvas dominated by a single beam of golden light cutting through layers of deep blue shadows. This was the moment that had changed everything, when Luna had first said, "I saw a light, Mommy." From that simple sentence, spoken in the smallest voice, an entire life had unfolded. Not just Luna's life, but mine and Richard's too. We had all been transformed by that moment of connection, that first breakthrough of truth. Luna's exhibition was a success. Art critics praised her unique visual vocabulary and profound understanding of the relationship between darkness and light. 3 of her paintings sold that night, and the gallery offered her a spot in their upcoming group show for emerging artists. As we drove Luna back to her dormitory after the opening, she rested her head on my shoulder in the back seat of the car. "Are you happy with how it went?" I asked, stroking her hair. "It's just the beginning," she replied, her voice sleepy but satisfied. "There's so much more I want to show people." "You have plenty of time," Richard said from the driver's seat, catching my eye in the rearview mirror with a smile. Luna yawned. "I've been thinking about starting a program for kids who are recovering their vision. Art therapy, but specifically designed for visual processing disorders. There's not much out there for children transitioning from blindness to sight." Even exhausted from her triumph, she was still thinking about others, about how to use her experience to help children facing similar challenges. As Luna drifted off to sleep against my shoulder, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From the grieving woman who had applied for a housekeeping job to escape her own pain, to the mother of this remarkable young artist. From a mansion filled with silence and secrets to a family built on truth and trust. We had uncovered a terrible wrong and fought to make it right. We had challenged a powerful system and created lasting change. But more important than any of that, we had found each other, three wounded souls who had healed together, creating something beautiful from brokenness. Luna's exhibition was titled Emergent Light, but that phrase described more than her art. It described our family, our journey, our shared life. We had emerged from darkness into something bright and beautiful, something none of us could have imagined on our own. As I looked out the car window at the city lights passing by, I reflected on how a single moment of attention, noticing Luna's reaction to that flashlight beam, had changed everything. Sometimes the most important truths are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to simply pay attention. Luna stirred against my shoulder and murmured something in her sleep. I leaned closer to hear. "Yellow," she whispered, "my favorite." I smiled and kissed her forehead gently. Yellow, the color of sunlight, of hope, of new beginnings. The color that had always made her feel happy, even before she knew what happiness looked like. In the front seat, Richard hummed quietly along with the radio, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. Our eyes met in the mirror again, sharing a moment of silent gratitude for the unexpected life we'd built together. Tomorrow, Luna would return to her classes, her friends, her growing career. Richard and I would drive back to the mansion that was now truly a home. Our foundation would continue its work, helping other families find their way through darkness. Life would move forward as it always does. But tonight, in this quiet moment between achievement and whatever came next, I simply held my daughter close and gave thanks for every step of our journey, even the painful ones. Because without the darkness, we might never have recognized the true value of light. I hope this story touched your heart and reminded you that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply pay attention to what others have missed. Truth has a way of emerging when someone cares enough to look closely. Please hit the subscribe button.